This morning, we are going to continue our series, walking through the book of Mark. Now, we jumped back into this last week, and if you recall, we are entering a section of Mark that highlights 5 kind of big controversies that Jesus stirred up with the established church at the time. Last week, we looked at the idea that Jesus claimed to be God via the ability to forgive sins, and how that was a real issue for the scribes at the time. And this week, we're going to look at the next of these controversies, and we're just going to go right down the text. So we're going to pick immediately up where we left off last week. So this is picking up in chapter 2, verse 14. As he, Jesus, was walking along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting in a tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Now, just real quickly in here, who is Levi? If you are a very close reader, you will notice that Levi is really not mentioned again in the book of Mark. And if you read some of the other Gospels, this story seems to line up with Matthew. So most scholars point to the fact that Levi is Matthew. They're the same person. It is not uncommon to have multiple names, whether it is an Aramaic name and a Greek name, or just to have 2 names in general. So just for confusion's sake, as we read forward in this book, things that you're like, where did Levi go? It's Matthew. They're more than likely the same person. So who is Levi/Matthew? Right now, all I know about them is they are a tax collector. And we've talked a little bit about what this entails, what this means, but I want to go over it again because I think it's really important for this person's character. A tax collector. So obviously someone who collects taxes. Very different than what we would call tax people now, right? Very different idea. This time, Rome is in charge of the entire area. As any empire will, they want their money. So they institute taxes on the people. Every region has a specific tax, whether it is what we think of as like an income tax kind of thing, or a road toll, or, which will come up in potentially this, but a lot of scholars point out the fact that Matthew Levi might have been taxing fish because of the location they're in, a major fishing village, and his location on the road, which if you recall, the disciples that Jesus already has, they're all fishermen. So those two are not going to get along very well right from the beginning. But the way it worked is Rome would employ local people to be the ones to collect taxes. Their thinking was, we don't want to waste any of our people for this. We'll find someone there to do it. So the idea was this person would take the established taxes, the taxes that Rome told them to, but anything else they took, that was theirs to keep. That was their pay. So you can imagine the real ease it would be to just kind of become corrupt and charge whatever you wanted to, because it lined your pocket, but also you had the backing of Rome behind you. So people kind of had to pay whatever you said. As a result, really no one liked these people. The locals would have seen them as a traitor, would have seen Matthew as a direct, Matthew, as a direct traitor, thinking you are working with and supporting and benefiting from this regime that is actively oppressing us. On the other side, Rome kind of agreed with them and said, yeah, these people are absolute traitors and the worst. We have no respect for them. Why do you think we employ them? We only employ the worst kind of people. So these people were just kind of hated by almost everyone around. So that is Matthew. That is kind of the person that's entering the story now. And this verse is the call of Matthew. Jesus says, "Follow me," and Matthew does. A really quick call narrative. There's no back and forth. It's just, hey, you want to come do this? Yeah, let's go. Mark is kind of notorious for that. If you recall in the last chapter, where we saw some of the earliest calls of the disciples, it's a similar thing. Mark is all about, let's just plow through the story, let's get to the narrative part. So, Matthew has been called, Matthew has been called. What happens after? Go on to verse 15. As he, Jesus, sat at Levi's house for dinner, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. Jesus goes to Levi's house for a meal. The group that is there is a big mix of people. So the disciples, Jesus has already called, are there. The people following Jesus are there. Because if you recall, Jesus has already built up this massive following of people just kind of huddled around him following. because we've seen miracles, we've seen healings, we've seen things like this happen. So these people definitely want to see what's happening. But also Levi's friends. Now, you might just say, but Jesse, you just said kind of everyone hates Levi. Why does he have friends? Who are these friends? Well, if you are an outcast, who are the people that are going to be your friends? The other outcast. The other people that the majority of society has said, ew, get away. So, this might have included poor. Because at the time, if you were poor, get away. It could have included foreigners who were not local to the area. Probably included people that were classified as sinners, people that were not allowed in the temple. Whatever the reason was, this was the group that gathered around Matthew, his friend group, were the people that everyone else said, no. You're not worthy enough to be with us, so naturally they're going to cluster together. Now, because of language here, we get the idea that this is more than just a normal dinner. It's not like they have their TV trays, they're watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, hanging out, having dinner. Think of it more like a party. It's this elevated gathering, which kind of makes sense, to me at least. Matthew, someone who doesn't have a lot of friends, and the friends he does have aren't the greatest of people. So when you have someone like Jesus, and we'll touch on Jesus' kind of like status in society toward the end here, but someone with an elevated status in society saying, hey, can we be friends? Can we hang out? Matthew's excited. Levi's excited. So he's probably pulling out all the stops to impress his new friend. And because of his status as a tax collector, he was probably pretty wealthy. So he could probably throw a pretty good party. So he's excited about having a friend of this status. So he throws his party. What happens at the party? Continuing on. When the scribes and the Pharisees saw that he was eating with tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Okay, last time we talked about the scribes. In overly simplified terms, we could think of them as kind of lawyers of the day. They were experts in the law. They were the ones that had copied it down to keep it transmission going. Now, today we're getting specifically the scribes of the Pharisees. So, what are the Pharisees? So think about, it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, but it could help. Think of like Christianity today. We have the umbrella term, Christianity, but then you have Catholicism, Protestantism, Presbyterians, Pentecostals, Baptist, different denominations. Kind of think of the Pharisees like that. You have Pharisees. There's a group called the Sadducees, the Essenes. There's these little groups. Think of them kind of like denominations at the time. Each had a slightly different understanding, a slightly different belief in what they would call the text. So you have the scribes, which are kind of the overall group of lawyers, experts, but then you have these individual kind of smaller groups. And so what we have in this example is basically the lawyers of the Pharisees are there bringing up this complaint. Does that kind of make sense about the idea of different denominations, using that term loosely? So the specific group, the Pharisees, their emphasis is on separation. In fact, that is oftentimes what they were called, was the separated ones. They emphasized very strict following of Torah, of the law. The idea being that, well, if things are going to get better, we have to hold ourselves to the highest of standards. So it was strict personal piety to the utmost extreme. Now, this group was generally composed of middle-class individuals, which is kind of important because the other main group that we're going to talk about throughout the story is the Sadducees. They were the aristocratic group. They were kind of the high society, had the money. They were kind of that old money group. The Pharisees are not that. They are the ones that honestly kind of have a chip on their shoulder. They're coming up being like, okay, we don't have money, status, we weren't born into that, so we're going to make ourselves feel better. We're going to create this separation through piety. Through, we are so much holier than you guys, so that elevates us. We're better than the people around us because of just how holy we are. And we will look down on anyone who doesn't hold that same level of holiness as we do. So that's the group that is coming. And their issue is that Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. Now, oftentimes we just kind of merge these two in together. Oh yeah, tax collectors and sinners, same idea, go forward. But they're not the same. And to the point of being annoying, the passage highlights that. Because they repeat the phrase, tax collectors and sinners, tax collectors and sinners, tax collectors and sinners, over and over and over again. So why? Let's talk about each of them individually. We touched a little bit on tax collectors, right? No one liked them. Outcast, scourge of society in a way. They were seen as kind of morally impure. Society, like, oh, they're not the best of people. But, very important to note, technically they hadn't broken any Mosaic law. They had not broken any law of Moses. Technically, they couldn't be called sinners. In the eyes of the people, they're bad people, they think, but technically they're not sinners. They haven't broken anything. No laws. The best way that I heard them described in readings was, you could think of them as almost they're non-practicing Jews. Or if you want to use kind of the modern analogy, is just they're people who don't go to church. So this is a group that the Pharisees often called people of the land. Getting back to that idea that you're not following the same kind of religious practices as me. So I'm better than you, and I'm going to keep you at an arm's distance. You, stay away. So that's the first group. Second group is just sinners. The idea that these people have broken the law, have broken the holiness codes, have broken whatever it is, so they are ritually, spiritually, all kinds of things unclean. And I think that's an important distinction to have between these two groups. So these are the two groups that the Pharisees are opposed to Jesus eating with. So the natural question is why? What is the big deal here? What is going on? This gets into Jesus' status. So Jesus, over and over, is called a teacher of the law, or a rabbi. Now, this isn't just a kind of flippant title. It is an actual kind of office. It takes work to get this official status. You might think of it kind of today as rabbi, or pastor, or something along those lines. Like, it's just not something you say willy-nilly. It's an actual status symbol. So for this group, it was against protocol for a teacher of the law to associate with uncleanliness, to be around sinners, to be around people that were unclean in other senses. Because the idea was, now they're infected, now they're unclean. They can't perform their duties now, right? Because remember, the idea of the separated ones is the group that is complaining. The idea of we have to keep everything at an arm's distance, especially the ones that are the most holy, the teachers of the law. So how does Jesus react to this? Oh, I closed out. Oh, goodness. There we go. Okay, I'm back. When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are sick have no need of a physician, but those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." Now, this is a pretty well-known phrase of Jesus. Most people, even if they have not been to church ever, have some idea of this phrase, of this idea. And it's the idea that how can people be turned to God? How can people experience God's love if we separate from them, if we're not around them, if they're ignored? But that's not the part I want to focus on. I want to focus on this end part here. The idea that Jesus says, "I have come to call not the righteous." Now, at first, we hear this and we're like, oh, well, yeah, like the righteous don't need Jesus. They're already righteous, right? I don't think that's what he's talking about here. Most of scholarship agrees that he is hearkening to this idea that we first read about in Hosea, in the Old Testament book of Hosea, where God is kind of yelling at the people of Israel. And specifically this passage here, where it talks about, this is God talking, "For what I desire is mercy, not sacrifices, knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." So this is kind of getting at the idea that God is mad at the people here for just going through the motions of being religious. These are the things that if we do, we'll be holy now. We'll be righteous now. Even though you're ignoring all of the heartbreak, pain, and suffering going on around you, you're kind of stepping over homeless people to get in to do your sacrifice. And that's what you think makes you righteous and holy. So in this passage, God is yelling at the people, being like, no, you're missing the point of these rituals. You're missing the point of being righteous. The point of it is not so you can separate yourselves, get away from those in pain. And so Jesus is hearkening back to this idea here. With this, I have not come to call the righteous. It's almost the idea of saying it's the sinners, the tax collectors, the group like that. They're the ones that are willing to listen. They're the ones that are open, so they're the ones I'm here for. You aren't even listening, so I'm not even going to waste my time with you right now. That is the idea that's happening here. And I think this is such a defining characteristic of Jesus' ministry. The idea of not being separate, of being together, being present. It's the idea that you don't have to change. Sinners, people who don't go to church, don't have to change who they are initially just to encounter Jesus. To get into the presence of Jesus, you come immediately as you are. And in the story, in fact, Jesus is seeking out people who the temple establishment wouldn't even be allowed close. To even get to the gate, outside of the inside of the temple, outside of the Holy of Holies, you had to be ritually clean in every aspect. Spiritually, religiously, physically, you had to wash to even get close to the presence of God. And here the presence of God is sitting down eating with individuals who society would not even let within 10 steps of the presence of God. So what does this mean for us today? Well, the kind of obvious one is we can't separate ourselves from the world. This kind of falls into the idea of righteousness that Jesus is calling out. This gets into the idea of how can we show God's love? How can we be the light, the love of God, if we just kind of stick to ourselves and don't go to places, don't interact with people who need that light, that love, who don't have that light, that love. If we just sit together here in this room on Sunday, talk about how much Jesus loves us, and don't do anything else the rest of the week, that's not a church. That's a country club. And I don't think any one of us you might want to be part of a country club. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't want the church to be a country club. We want to be a place that welcomes people. I feel like a lot of times that's a catchphrase of a lot of churches, like everyone's welcome here. Except you can't wear that to church. You have to change before you can come in here. Oh, you think that? Well, I'm going to need you to sit on the opposite side of me. Oh, you believe that? Oh, I don't even want you here to have a conversation about anything right now. I think oftentimes as the church, we kind of go full Slim Shady on people. We want everyone is welcome here so long as you dress like me, walk, talk, and act like me. But that's not how it should be. We want to welcome people as they are. Because if we don't, how are we any different than the temple system of the Old Testament and the Second Temple period? You can't even approach God, approach us before you change. I think this stems from, honestly, us kind of missing one of the big main ideas of Christianity. So, follow with me here. The point of being a Christian, the point of Christianity, is not to go to heaven. If that is the only reason you're a Christian, to go to heaven, we have failed you. You have missed the entire point. Because Christianity should not be a faith of abandonment, of this place sucks, so I'm going to do whatever I can to leave it, to get out of it, and y'all fend for yourself. I don't care anymore. Y'all sit in your own squalor, I'm out. Christianity should be a faith of embracing, of healing, of restoration. It's the idea of trying to bring heaven to earth. I mean, how often do we say it or sing it here in this building? At least once a week, your kingdom come. That's how Jesus told us to pray. We're praying for the kingdom of God, for heaven to come here. And this should be the basis of how we live out our lives, how we live out our faith. Because it's not about, I need to be good enough to leave this place and get to the good place. It should be, what can I do to help bring the good place here for everyone? And how can we do that if we're separated, sequestered, hidden away, not engaging with everyone else? Now, obviously, this does not mean you get carte blanche to do whatever you want. That you can go run amok sinning and be like, well, Jesus ate with sinners, so can I. I know that's not the point of this passage, and really, you know that's not the point of this passage. If you are trying to justify it, you're just lying to yourself, justifying it. You know. You have to have discernment for yourself. There was a phrase in the first century church from this passage that talked about doctors heal the sick only as long as the sick don't infect the doctors. So you have to use discernment now. This passage isn't about go out and put yourself in the most extreme dangerous situations or put yourself in a spot where you could fall or fail. One of my best friends from seminary is a recovering alcoholic. Now, obviously, this person is not going to go start a Bibles and Brew group. Like, that's not a smart choice for them. They're not going to do that. But other people can. Other people do. And that's a great ministry opportunity. So it's about understanding yourself and understanding the call God has for you. Understanding how we can partner with God in the redemption of all things. Because that's what it's about. It's not about hiding away, waiting to get out of this place to go to the good place. It's working to bring the love and grace and mercy of up there down here to be present with us today. Join me as we pray.